Will you talk about the side deck, like evenly, etc.? That is what's up next. Now, chat, you have the choice. Hand traps or board breakers? What are we doing first? Flip a coin? Okay, so we're gonna do heads is board breakers, tails is hand traps. Heads, we start with board breakers. Don't say rigged. I flipped a coin. I flipped the coin and it was Kopf. It's Kopf. Board breakers, right? I forgot. What did I flip? I flipped board breakers, right? Yeah, I flipped board breakers. Yeah. Okay. Now, I guess I have to do another YouTube intro. What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to another tier list, dude. Today is tier list day for the new format. Next up, we're talking about board breakers slash going second cards slash, I guess you could call it non-engine tech cards, whatever. We are talking about, you know, the likes of your power spells, your kaijus, lava golems, sphere modes, all that type of stuff in this video for the upcoming format for Magnificent Mavens. We finished this one just now, and I guess it's important to take a quick look at it. If you missed the video, that's going to be the video before this one, so you can check that out. This is the meta game that I'm going off of here. Deck to beat is Ishizu tier, but you have to consider, like, you know, a little bit of Sprite, a little bit of Flunder, some of these down here, and then you don't really have to consider these, but I guess it's a bonus if the card is good against these. That's what we're going off of when I'm evaluating these types of cards. So the categories we're using very strong cards because they're strong against like Ishizu tier and also other decks. Decent is like a card that can be played but might not want to be played, or like only in specific decks, only against specific decks, maybe you only want to side it. We'll talk about when we get there. Experimental or niche stuff is like only good in a few matchups, or something that I would consider like needs to be tried out before I can say if it's good or not. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, it's just self-explanatory. Let's just get right into it. Sphere mode and Lava Golem. Two cards that have gotten a lot of attention recently, especially, I mean, in Runics, right? Let's be real. That's the deck that played them the most, is like Runic Sprite, or TIERLIST is able to play these to some extent. I'm gonna put these two into the decent category because I believe both of these cards are very strong if your deck can easily play them, right? Like if your deck can facilitate Lava Golem in Sphere mode, they are good board breakers right now. However, there are not that many decks that actually can, because like I said, if you've watched my tier list, Runic decks have gotten a huge hit from the Ishizu stuff being in the metagame. The reason why I'm not putting them into niche is because specifically Ishizu tier can play them, and they are good against Ishizu tier, right? That's why I think they should be here in the decent category, because I mean, we can't argue about it. If you can pull these off, they're better than mediocre or niche. They are pretty strong. Not many decks can though. However, it's like worth noting that like they don't solve everything from the Ishizu tier board. That's why I'm not throwing them into very strong as well. It's because even if you get to tribute like 2 or 3 monsters from Ishizu tier, if they have a Havness in hand, they have a Herald of Orange Light in hand with an Agido or a Kelbeck, if they have just Kelbeck, there's like ways they can still play on your turn to disrupt you. Sometimes they put more than 2 monsters on the board. In the case of Lava Golem, if you're playing a grave heavy deck, these are specifically not that good because you're gonna get Dweller before you contribute it off. That's something to consider. So in the right decks, these can be strong, but there aren't many decks that can use them, but they're still decent cards if you can use them. Raigeki is a card that I'm going to put into the experimental slash niche category, as well as Dark Hole. Both of these cards not main deckable at all. They are both not strong against tier limits, simply because the tier limit cards trigger in the graveyard. Do not main deck these cards. Both of these cards have solid side deck applications. The main deck that I'm always hearing when it comes to these cards is they are good against Flunder. You know, it feels good, right? Raigeki or Dark Holing a barrier statue and an Empen. That feels nice. I like that. The reason why I'm putting both of them in the same category, you might think Raigeki is a straight up better card than Dark Hole. You might think that. However, that's not always the case. There are some applications for Dark Hole where it's actually better than Raigeki. A few examples that are actually relevant. Mystic Mine. You can out Mystic Mine with Dark Hole. It's a very unconventional way of doing it, but it's possible. Ra's Disciple. A card that some Despia decks have been running to lock out opponents. They've been running Ra's Disciple, or what is it called? Edo, the Supreme Magic Force or whatever, that they give to you by using Branded Expulsion. You can Dark Hole out that. You can out Ibli, which those are things that Raigeki cannot do. So maybe if you want to be prepared for those things, you might want to play Dark Hole instead. However, against Flunder, Raigeki is better, of course, because sometimes they don't have the statue immediately, right? Maybe they have only Empen and the Trap, and then in order for them to force them to summon statue, you have to like normal summon into their field spell, right? And if you then have to dark hold your own normal summon, it can be annoying. Of course, in some decks it can be fine, like TIERLIST don't care. TIERLIST can dark hold their normal summon and trigger it in the graveyard, like a Merly or whatever. But yeah, just so you're aware, I don't think in this format it's as easy as, oh, Raigeki better card than dark hold. I think it's not the case. I think they both have some stuff going for them, and I think that's interesting. Lightning Storm is weird because in side deck, I like it. I don't think we are only considering main deck here. I think overall the card is decent. Definitely a good card this format against a decent amount of decks. Mostly for Rogue though. I don't think I would side this card in against TIERLIST, for the same reason that Darkhold and Raigeki aren't as good. I'm not throwing it into very strong simply because I think for a card to be considered very strong, it needs to be strong against Ishizu tier. But Lightning Storm is a decent card this format. It's one of those cards that simply covers a lot of matchups, right? It's like lots of matchups you can use Lightning Storm in, so you're not only preparing for like the top 3 decks, you're also preparing for a lot of the other decks in the format. Evenly, however, next up, Evenly I think we can consider a very strong card. Something that's worth noting is like Evenly has been good against tier limits for a while now. It's been a strong card against tier decks and other meta decks for a long time. However, I do think I'm gonna add more and more cards to this tier list, and Evenly Matched is gonna move down the very strong tier. I don't think it's the strongest board breaker out of the ones that we have. I think Evenly's biggest advantage is that it's good against literally every deck going second, right? That's a very strong feature of a side deck card, being able to side it in pretty much every single matchup. Right? The reason why I'm saying this is because I think Ishizu tier brings a couple of things to the table that stop Evenly Matched. The deck is no longer a deck without negates. The deck now has TIERLIST's Crime in the main deck most of the time. It has Barone if they play Diviner a decent amount of the time. So Evenly can be bad with that. Like people are saying in chat, Evenly can clash with Bestials in your deck. If you Bestial going second against TIERLIST, not able to use Evenly, right? Unless you crash your Bestial, which isn't ideal. It's a strong card, it's very flexible, it goes in a lot of matchups, but it's not the game winner that it used to be, right? Because like, Flunder can summon Apex, TIERLIST can summon Barone or Crime. The Sprite decks that I've been seeing have all been back on a Toad negate now, right? There's not that many like Runic decks anymore that don't have a negate. Most of it is now Toad again. I think the pure flexibility of the card can still make it considerably a very strong card, even though the more I'm talking about it, I might end up throwing it in decent. Even though the card sounds very strong in theory, I think in practice, you might end up finding yourself losing a battle phase just to bait out a Barone negate, which isn't the best feeling in the world, right? Not having a battle phase to force Barone doesn't seem great. Playing this into a Toad also doesn't feel awesome, right? I don't know. I'm not sure if I like this card that much. Ultimate Slayer is a card that, honestly, I still really like this card. I haven't been using it recently, so I can't even blame anyone else for this either. It's like the card hasn't really performed as well as I think it could. And I think one of the main reasons, honestly, one of the main reasons that's stopping me from playing Ultimate Slayer is freaking Sprite Elf. Can we talk about how weird it is that Sprite Elf just randomly has the target protection? I don't think you have to play like all different kinds of targets for Ultimate Slayer for it to be a good card, right? Like some people don't like the fact that you have to play a Link monster plus the Evil Twin, Trouble Sunny, and the main deck brick as well, right? People don't like that. Now, you don't have to play a Link target for this to be a good card. You could just play a fusion target. Like, you can play Garura, and this card is very good against tier limits, for example. It's not gonna win you the game on its own to go Ultimate Slayer, target your Kaleido Heart, or rule Kalos, send Garura, draw a card. However, you can't argue that that's a very powerful move, right? Because you have the same amount of cards as you did before, but you have dealt with a powerful threat. So I'm gonna throw this in decent. I think there is some hope for this card in this format. I think, of course, another big hurdle to this card is having to have the space in the extra deck, which that's honestly the one thing that has been stopping me from using this card, right? This card, I think, would be perfect for something like Power Spell Sprite. Power Spell Sprite is really about like trading favorably with your opponent's cards. It's like resolve like Mind Control, Change of Heart, Talents, Enemy Controller, and Ultimate Slayer would go right in the same alley. It would be a perfect card in Power Spell Sprite, but Power Spell Sprite typically can't afford to play a couple different targets in the extra deck to utilize this card. However, I think if you find a deck that has room for it, the card's got its merits. Maybe even in like tier limit mirror matches, you can play it because you already play Garura. Maybe, I don't know. Haven't tested it in Ishizu tier mirrors, but I think it's got potential. Droplets. I'm always a big fan of being able to play droplets because it's so strong when your deck can make use of it. The problem is I actually only see one deck really playing droplets right now, and that is Ishizu Tier itself, because this card answers Dweller. I have a few issues with it though. I think in general, if you don't consider Dweller a thing, this card is not that good. And then at the same time, all the Tearlament players have been playing Tearlament's Crime. If they have Crime, you need to draw this card with a trap card. Otherwise, they just crime it and, you know, you cry. I think that's what makes it experimental for me. I don't know if this is the answer to Dweller. I genuinely don't know. It doesn't convince me that this would be the answer for Dweller, like the Hail Mary thing that solves the Dweller problem. It's good against Sprite. However, like most decks in the metagame don't have great sense for it. So that's also why I'm not seeing it that much right now. I'm not convinced by droplets. The first card that I am 100% convinced goes into the very strong category. Talons is very strong in this metagame, I feel like. I've been liking Talons a lot. Literally, the only reason for me to not throw Talons into all of my decks so far has simply been space issues. Like, Ishizu Tier is a deck that is incredibly tight because it has so many staples in it, right? It's so hard to fit like different tech cards in Ishizu Tier. But like in my Sprite decks, this card has always been a 3 of so far, and I've been loving it. Sometimes you go for the draw, sometimes you go for a steal your opponent's monsters, which can be very strong. And then sometimes if you can still combo through, you can look at your opponent's hand. The card is really strong going second. The card is also really strong going first because, I mean, every Ishizu Tier has like Havnis, Herald of Orange Light, Kelbeck. Even if they play no further hand traps, they have like 9 hand traps in the main deck, which is like, this card is going to be live turn 1 very often. People are playing Bisteals left and right. I think Talons is an amazing card right now. The only reason not to play the card, for example, this card doesn't solve Dweller. As an example, if I'm playing Ishizu Tier, I only have a very limited amount of spaces in my deck, and maybe a card that prevents Dweller, like Droplets or maybe like Bisteals, could be considered more important than Triple Tactics Talons. That's the only reason I see to not play this card, is if you don't have Varun. That could be a legit concern, but if you're sitting there right now and have like a 37 card list that you're really happy with and you're really wondering what could I put in, I don't think you're going wrong with Talons in any deck in the format right now. I don't even know why Chalice is in here. I'm gonna put it in mediocre. I guess in theory it has its uses for Abyss Dweller. However, the Abyss Dweller is usually backed up by a Sprite Elf targeting protection, or it could also be backed up by a Tearlament's Crime or whatever. It's just mediocre, I think. I mean, Imperm is always better. I don't think you play both. It's mediocre for sure. Kurikara, for me, I like this card. I genuinely do. I think it's a very nice card design because it never strikes me as broken, right? I never feel like Kurikara is like the insanely most powerful card ever. It's a good card though. I don't know if it's good enough to be played over the other options on this tier list, but I'm not going to throw it in mediocre because I think it's better than that. Against tier and Sprite boards, it could genuinely help out certain things. Like in the tier mirror, for example, maybe there's a world in which you can, like, after they Dweller, you start playing, they use Barone, and then you tribute Dweller and Barone, you run over, I don't know, Kaleido Heart with 4500, and then in the end phase you revive the Barone. Maybe it gives you a way to beat Dweller. It's not impossible, it's not out of the question. I don't know how easy such a play would be. Against Sprite, you can be like, let's say they have Elf and Toad, right? They have Elf and Toad and you announce battle phase. So they're like, oh, he has Evenly or whatever, maybe he has Super Poly. I'm just going to use the Elf Revive on, I don't know, Sprite Blue, right? And then they use Sprite Blue's effect to search. And then you go, okay, Kurikara, tribute Elf and Blue, 4500 Kurikara, attack your Toad. Gets rid of the Elf and the Toad, 4500 body on the board. In the end phase, you can like revive something from their graveyard. I don't think it's a bad card. I just don't think it's a bad card. I think it's experimental. Change of Heart and Mind Control, I'm gonna throw at the very top of decent. Not every deck can or should play these. However, I really like the cards in Sprites. I was playing Power Spell Sprites and I used both of these cards. They felt good. The main reason why I like these cards is because of what I mentioned earlier when I said Ishizu Tier very often puts monsters on the field on your turn. If they go ahead and Havnis you on their turn and they like start playing and they make a Rule Kalos and you just take that Rule Kalos, that's nice. And then going second, it's obviously strong. If they have like a Saliak setup with Rule Kalos next to it, like they usually only have like 1 or 2 tier elements. And I've had games, they ended Kaleido and Rule Kalos and they didn't have Pearl Rhino. So I just went like change of heart, take your Kaleido heart and then just double with your Rule Kalos. And it was genuinely just good, right? Killing both of those off, disabling the back row as well. It's like, it's solid. It's like hard to have room for these, and going first, they're not always good, but they're good cards, I think. Super Poly, I'm having mixed feelings about. My first intention whenever I see this card, my intuition is always to put it into the very strong category. And I think that's where it's going to be. I think it might be better than Talents, honestly. In the right deck, of course. I mean, every deck can hypothetically play the card. It's at its best, of course, in like decks, maybe Tierlements or branded Despia decks that have the option. If your opponent plays around Super Poly, you can still fuse with your own stuff, which is like so stupid to me sometimes. You spend so much time and effort to play around Super Poly with your Sprite deck. You're like, okay, I'm going to make Elf, Toad, and a dark monster so they cannot super poly me, I'm set, and then they just go like, yeah, normal summon a tier element, super poly your Toad away, and it's still super annoying. In tier elements and like Despia, the card is just stupid. It has an added benefit, which it has something very specific over Droplet. I don't know how common that will be, but if your opponent goes for tier elements, Rule Kalos, and Abyss Dweller on the first turn, if you have super poly, the game pretty much ends. I mean, it doesn't end right on the spot, but it's pretty damn good to out a Dweller with a super poly, right? Because you fuse away the Rule Kalos and the Dweller, you get Mud Dragon. They get the Rule Kalos back, but like you having Mud Dragon target protection is like insane because you can like protect from Saliak and whatever. That makes it pretty good, especially because if you discard Mudora, Keldo, Agido, or Kelbeck, they are all really strong discards for Super Poly. So I expect this card to be the #1 played non-engine card in Ishizu tier, which is also why, you know, that might be the reason to not play Talents, right? Maybe you think Super Poly is more important, or some hand traps are more important. It's quite a strong card. Dark Ruler, no more. I think Dark Ruler needs to be in the decent category because it's only okay. I think if you only consider Ishizu tier, a lot of other cards are better than Dark Ruler against Ishizu tier. Like, I think if we're only talking about Ishizu tier, an Ultimate Slayer with Garura in the extra deck is better than Dark Ruler overall, because the tier element deck has so many ways to play around Dark Ruler, right? You have Saliak, you have Havness, you have Crime to negate it, Herald of the Orange Light, you have Modora and Keldo in the graveyard for further disruption. Tier elements is just not a deck that puts all of its eggs into one basket, which is like on-field monster effects. Dark Ruler No More is not going to just straight up win you the game against tier element ever unless their hand is very mediocre. It doesn't help with Dweller in the mirror match, yada yada yada. Still, it's a good card against tier. Even if you don't auto-win, if you just negate like Barone and Rule Kalos, that might still be worth it, right? That might be okay. And then as well, I think it's one of the most flexible going second cards because it's just good in every matchup, right? Your opponent's playing Sprite with Toad, card is good. Your opponent's playing Flunder, card is good. Your opponent's playing all-in freaking combo decks, card is very good. I think Dark Ruler is the better droplet overall, with the only exception that it doesn't beat Abyss Dweller. It's particularly worth noting that Dark Ruler is not very good going first, because even if they put stuff onto the field, like a Dragostapelia or a Rule Kalos, if you have to Dark Ruler that on your first turn just to be able to play, and then it still stays there because your card doesn't remove it from the board, right? It still stays there and is still going to be annoying on the future turns. I think that's where Dark Ruler is really lacking, as opposed to cards like Talents, Change of Heart, Mind Control, even Ultimate Slayer in that regard, Super Poly. It's not always dead if they play on your turn, but it's still not very good, I think. Let's do the spell cards first before we talk about the monsters. So, Mystic Mine. Mystic Mine. Chat, what do we think of Mystic Mine? I personally cannot put this card too low on this list because it's freaking Mystic Mine. The card is strong. I'm not going to put it into very strong for a few reasons. The card is terrible against Sprite now, I believe. Because Sprite now, the standard Sprite board is Toad Negate, Smashers, most of the time double Toad Negate unless you don't have monsters. It's really tough to resolve Mystic Mine. And even then, like, sometimes they have like a double Toad Negate with double cross. Against Sprite it's not good. Against Flunder it's not good. Against Ishizu tier, that's always been the main selling point of Mystic Mine, right? It's always been like, okay, card is good against tier elements. Tier elements, if they don't play a main deck out, can't beat it, right? People have been playing like Galaxy Cyclone or Vivid Tail or High Rate Draw, right? They had to play such weird out outs to beat Mystic Mine in TIERLIST. All of a sudden, the deck has Baronne, the deck has TIERLIST Crime, the deck has TIERLIST Heartbeat, which is an out that a lot of TIERLIST players play, which is even searchable. And then even if they don't draw an out, even if they don't even play an out, the Ishizu tier deck can out Mystic Mine in the moment you activate it. If they have Pearl Rhino on the field and Mudora or Keldo in the graveyard, you go activate Mystic Mine, they go chain Keldo or Mudora, shuffle a TIERLIST from the graveyard into the deck, pop your Mystic Mine on resolution with Pearl Rhino. If they have Pearl Rhino, you basically have to have 2 Mystic Mines, which if you have 2 Mystic Mines, it's good, but that's a much harder thing to do. Against other decks other than Sprite, Tier, and Plunder, the card is potentially still good, but honestly, I have a hard time putting it higher. It feels very awkward to put Mystic Mine that low in a freaking tier list because it's Mystic Mine, but I think I have to put it here. The card should still be banned, only because it's not good in this one particular format. I don't think it shouldn't be banned or anything, or is an okay card. It just happens to not be that good against the current top decks. Enemy controller, here, maybe? It depends a little bit. The card is not good in every deck. Enemy controller just happens to be a good card against TIERLIST. Dodges Saliak, dodges Dragostapelia, steals Rule Kalos, steals Kaleido Heart, steals whatever, steals Sprite Elf if you're playing a Sprite deck. I have been specifically enjoying this card in Sprites. In Sprites, I like this card a lot. I don't know how good it is in other decks, but since Sprite is still, in my opinion, one of the better decks in the format, I think that still makes it a decent card. If you're playing Sprite, you can consider playing this card. I think it's pretty good. It has the added benefit of being good going first and second. Like, admittedly, going first, sometimes it's not that great, but like stealing your opponent's cards when you go first as a set card is like valuable. So I like that. I think it's a solid card. Slumber and Kaijus, I'm pretty sure are mediocre. The one thing that stops me from putting Slumber into the unplayable category is I have seen, or I have heard of the idea of playing Slumber in TIERLIST because it helps you play around stuff like Impermanence or Evenly Matched or Lightning Storm, even though Lightning Storm is not very relevant. And Gameciel is an Aqua. I don't know, you can Slumber yourself going first. Like, you go normal summon Merly, Mill, and then you Slumber yourself and give yourself the Aqua Kaiju, and then you can make Kid Kalos and whatever. It's very niche. I don't think it's very good. Kaijus itself I consider unplayable. 1-for-1 trades with a card like Dragostapelia or Rule Kalos or Kaleido Heart or whatever is not worth it. There's so many easy ways to trade 1-for-1. You don't have to play Kaijus for it. Kaijus are not very good going first. Not a huge fan of Kaijus. And now we have the 3 dudes down here, all 3 of which I am in general big fan of. I'm gonna go ahead and throw Pancratops in the niche category because I think Pancratops out of these 3 is the worst one against Ishizu tier. I think that alone makes it a niche card because, you know, it's not good against Ishizu tier unless they play Floodgates, which, you know, it's decent against Sprite. It's decent against every rogue deck. So, like, you can side deck the one of Pancratops. You're just not going to be able to use it, I think, against Ishizu tier, which you have to know for yourself if you think that's worth it. He's a good card still. He's just not amazing against Ishizu tier. That's why I'm not putting him up here. Oh yeah, that's Pancratops for you. And then we have new Pancratops, Pancratops 2.0, Fenrir. Where does Fenrir go? In a vacuum, the card goes here. In a vacuum, the card is insane. The only thing that's stopping everyone from playing Fenrir right now is that people are playing Bystials, right? For the most part, you have to decide between Bystials or Fenrir. It's not impossible to play both. It's not completely awful to play both. It's fine to play Bystials and Fenrir together, but they clash. You know, you go second, you summon a Bystial on your opponent's turn, you have Fenrir in hand. It's clashing, it's annoying, right? But the card is incredibly good, right? Just that with TIERLIST being the top tier deck, I think Fenrir is kind of downgraded into the decent category. Don't get me wrong, I think if you don't main deck Fenrir, you still very much are inclined to side deck it because it's like good in every other matchup pretty much. It's very, very understandable that Bystials are preferred right now because of TIERLIST being in the metagame. The thing is, Fenrir's time will come. Eventually, we're not gonna have a TIERLIST metagame. It's not going to be Bystials are better every single time from now on. There is going to be a time where Fenrir will be probably one of the best cards in the game, period. Just not right now. Alpha is a card, I like Alpha so much. I'm in pain that I haven't been able to like use Alpha in one of my decks yet at like YCSs and such. I'm like, I like Alpha because it's like such a cool card. It's like board breaker, recurring resource, comes back to your hand, big body. Yeah, it's even a good card against Tearlaments, which is why I think this card has potential. The problem is I always want to put this card into the decent category because I'm convinced that it's decent. I'm convinced that this is a good card, but I haven't seen anyone use it to great success. Me, myself included, I haven't been able to use Alpha to great success, also not in this meta yet. It doesn't even conflict with Bystials. Yeah, you're right. You can use it in Bystials because if you use a Bystial and your opponent still has like more attack on the board, you can still use Alpha. I think it's a good card. I think it's more experimental than niche, if anything, in this second category. It might end up being a good choice for you. I like Alpha, especially because like bouncing Tearlament fusions is a good way of getting rid of them, is a good way of preventing them from using their graveyard effects. I like Alpha. It's a good card. Yeah, and that's what I think of board breakers. Once again, with these tier lists, if I missed a going second card, a board breaker, that you want to know my opinion about, leave it in the comments down below. Not hand traps though. We have a separate tier list coming for hand traps. And if you want to catch me live doing these things, you know, Twitch link is in the description down below. Whatever, say goodbye to YouTube chat. Hope you enjoyed the video. Bye bye. See you next time. Immediately when I say goodbye to YouTube, there's a Joel in chat. Yeah, multiple of those.